The walls of General Hospital have always felt like a sanctuary for Dr. Portia Robinson, a place where the sterile scent of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of monitors represented the order she fought so hard to maintain in an often chaotic life. But today, the hospital feels like a labyrinth of shadows, a cold and indifferent structure that seems to be closing in on her with every breath she takes. The weight of her secret, the precarious nature of her pregnancy, and the looming threat over her brother Isaiah have converged into a perfect storm of emotional and physical agony. She moves through the corridors with a practiced grace, nodding to nurses and colleagues who see only the composed, brilliant chief of medicine, never suspecting that beneath the lab coat, Portia is a woman teetering on the edge of a total collapse. The air in the hospital is thick with the tension of unspoken fears, and as she reaches her office, the first sharp, stabbing pain blooms in her lower abdomen, a cruel reminder that her body is no longer a vessel of strength, but a fragile cage holding on to a dream that is rapidly slipping away. The medical emergency does not begin with a scream, but with a terrifying, hushed realization. Portia sinks into her leather chair, her hand instinctively flying to her stomach as a cold sweat breaks out across her forehead. She tries to rationalize the pain, telling herself it is merely the stress of the week, the exhaustion of balancing her professional duties with the frantic legal maneuvering required to save Isaiah. But the pain intensifies, a rhythmic, searing heat that radiates through her hips and down her legs, signaling a crisis that no amount of medical expertise can ignore. She looks at the clock on her desk, the ticking sound echoing like a countdown to a disaster she is powerless to stop. Her thoughts flicker to Curtis, to the future they had meticulously planned, and to the child that was supposed to be the ultimate symbol of their reconciliation and hope. Now, that hope is being eclipsed by a darkness so profound that it threatens to swallow her whole. Outside the heavy oak doors of her office, the bustling world of Portia Charles's medical empire continues unabated, oblivious to the fact that its leader is currently drowning in a sea of physiological trauma. Portia reaches for her phone, her fingers trembling so violently that she nearly drops it. She needs to call for help, but the pride of a doctor and the fear of a mother war within her. If she calls out, the reality of the situation becomes undeniable. If she remains silent, she risks everything. The irony is not lost on her. She has spent her career saving lives, navigating the most complex of surgical procedures and diagnostic puzzles, yet here she sits, unable to save the one life that matters most to her in this moment. The pain surges again, sharper this time, accompanied by a wave of nausea that leaves her gasping for air. She knows the signs, the cramping, the spotting that she can already feel beginning, and the clinical part of her brain begins to provide a cold, detached commentary on her own miscarriage, even as her heart screams out in denial. While Portia battles the physical dissolution of her future in the quiet of her office, her brother Isaiah is facing a different kind of death, the death of his freedom. Locked in a sterile interrogation room at the Port Charles Police Department, Isaiah stares at the flickering fluorescent lights above, the hum of the electricity sounding like a swarm of angry hornets. The evidence against him is mounting, a series of circumstantial links and orchestrated betrayals that have painted him as a man far removed from the healer he truly is. The detectives speak in low, accusatory tones, their words designed to chip away at his resolve, to make him believe that prison is an inevitability rather than a possibility. Isaiah thinks of Portia, knowing how much she has sacrificed to protect him, and the guilt he feels is more suffocating than the four walls surrounding him. He is unaware of the tragedy unfolding at the hospital, his mind occupied solely by the legal machinery that is grinding toward a conviction. The narrative of General Hospital has always been one of intertwined fates, and today, those threads are being pulled taut until they snap. Jordan Ashford, pacing the halls of the PCPD, feels a nagging sense of unease that she cannot quite shake. She has seen the look in Isaiah's eyes, the look of a man who is being framed, who is caught in a web far larger than he can navigate alone. But her duty to the law is clear, and the pressure from the district attorney's office to secure a high-profile win is immense. She wants to help Portia, her friend and confidant, but every lead she follows seems to bring her back to Isaiah's doorstep. She is caught between her intuition and the evidence, unaware that while she searches for the truth to save a man's life, the woman she is trying to support is losing the very thing she cherishes most. Back at the hospital, the silence of Portia's office is finally broken by the sound of a falling tray. A nurse, entering to deliver a set of lab results, finds the chief of medicine slumped over her desk, her face ashen and her breathing shallow. The emergency protocol is triggered instantly. The code blue of a different sort echoes through the halls, not for a patient in a ward, but for one of their own. Portia is rushed to the OBGYN wing, the very place where she has spent so many hours celebrating the arrival of new life. Now, she is the one on the gurney, the bright lights of the ceiling blurring into long, white streaks as she is wheeled toward an operating room. She tries to speak, to tell them what is happening, but the pain has robbed her of her voice. All she can do is stare up at the faces of her colleagues, seeing the pity and the panic in their eyes, and she knows. She knows before the ultrasound technician even places the probe on her skin. She knows before the doctor shakes her head in a slow, mournful gesture. The heartbeat, once a steady, galloping promise of the future, is gone. The loss of the baby is a visceral, tearing sensation that leaves Portia feeling hollowed out, a shell of the woman she was just an hour ago. As the medical team works to stabilize her, the emotional impact begins to settle in, a cold, heavy weight that anchors her to the hospital bed. She thinks of the nursery they had started to plan, the names they had whispered in the dark, and the way Curtis had looked when he first felt the flutter of movement. All of it has been erased in a matter of moments. The silence in the room is deafening, punctuated only by the soft sob that finally escapes Portia's lips. She is alone in her grief, her husband still unaware of the tragedy, and her brother facing a life behind bars. The isolation is total, a crushing realization that despite her status and her skill, she is just as vulnerable to the whims of fate as any of the patients she treats. In the precinct, the atmosphere shifts as the detectives receive a call. The news of Portia's collapse filters through the department, reaching Jordan first. The color drains from her face as she realizes the gravity of the situation. She has to tell Isaiah, but how do you tell a man who is already facing the end of his career and his freedom that his sister is in the midst of a life-altering medical crisis? She enters the interrogation room, her expression softened by a grief that is not her own. Isaiah looks up, sensing the change in the air. He expects another round of questions, another attempt to force a confession. Instead, Jordan sits down across from him and delivers the news that shatters what little strength he had left. Portia is in the hospital. She has lost the baby. The words hang in the air like a death sentence, and for a moment, Isaiah cannot breathe. The walls of the room seem to pulse with the rhythm of his own heartbeat, a frantic, irregular thrumming that mimics the chaos of his life. The legal battle for Isaiah's future takes on a new, more desperate urgency in the wake of the miscarriage. His lawyers, sensing the emotional vulnerability of their client, try to use the family tragedy to gain a stay or a more lenient hearing, but the prosecution is relentless. They see Isaiah's distress not as grief, but as a potential crack in his armor. The trial, once a distant threat, is now a looming reality, a monster that is waiting to consume him. Isaiah sits in his cell, the sounds of the jail echoing around him, and he feels a profound sense of failure. He was supposed to be the one to help Portia, to support her during her pregnancy, to be the uncle this child deserved. Instead, he is a prisoner of his own circumstances, unable to even go to her side. The injustice of it all burns in his chest, a slow-rolling fire that threatens to turn his sorrow into a dangerous, volatile anger. Portia, lying in her hospital bed, watches the shadows lengthen across the room as evening falls. The physical pain has been numbed by medication, but the emotional ache is a constant, gnawing presence. Curtis arrives, his face a mask of devastated shock, and for a long time, they do not speak. There are no words that can bridge the gap created by this loss. They hold each other, two people adrift in a sea of what-ifs and if-onlys. The tragedy has not brought them closer, instead, it has highlighted the fragility of their bond, the way their happiness was built on a foundation that could be swept away by a single, cruel wave. Portia looks at her husband and sees the reflection of her own despair, and she wonders if they will ever be able to look at each other again without seeing the ghost of the child they lost. As the first chapter of this nightmare closes, the stakes for the Robinson and Ashford families have never been higher. Portia is physically recovering but emotionally shattered, her role as the matriarch and the healer of the family compromised by her own overwhelming grief. Isaiah is standing on the precipice of a prison sentence that would not only end his career but also separate him from the only people he has left in the world. The villains who orchestrated Isaiah's downfall remain in the shadows, their victory almost complete as they watch the family crumble from within. The halls of General Hospital, once a place of hope, have become a theater of tragedy, and the road to recovery seems impossibly long and fraught with further peril. The storm has broken, and in its wake, only the wreckage of dreams remains, leaving Portia and Isaiah to face a future that is as uncertain as it is bleak. The aftermath of the physical trauma leaves Portia Robinson in a state of hollowed suspension, where the antiseptic environment she once commanded now feels like a sterile prison of her own making. The second chapter of this harrowing ordeal begins not with a recovery, but with the slow, agonizing realization that the world outside her hospital room is still moving, still demanding her strength even as she feels she has none left to give. Curtis remains by her side, his presence a heavy reminder of the future that vanished in a single afternoon of blood and terror. The silence between them is no longer supportive, it is a chasm filled with the unspoken questions of how they missed the signs and how a woman of her medical standing could be so blindsided by her own body's rebellion. Portia stares at the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations to keep from screaming, while her mind incessantly loops back to the image of the empty ultrasound screen. The clinical coldness of that moment, the lack of a heartbeat, has become the new rhythm of her life, a silent pulse that beats with the cadence of failure. While Portia grapples with the void in her womb, the legal machinery surrounding Isaiah reaches a fever pitch of cold efficiency. The district attorney, sensing a weakened defense, pushes for an expedited hearing, moving the goalposts so quickly that Isaiah's legal team is left scrambling in the dark. In the holding cell, Isaiah has moved past the initial shock of Portia's loss and into a state of focused, quiet desperation. The grief for his sister and his unborn niece or nephew has hardened into a resolve to survive, though the evidence against him remains a formidable wall. He is visited by Diane Miller, whose sharp intellect and sharper tongue are usually enough to intimidate any prosecutor, but even she looks weary as she spreads files across the small metal table. The paper trail is a masterpiece of forgery and manipulation, planting Isaiah's digital fingerprints on documents he never saw and placing him in rooms he never entered. The threat of prison is no longer a shadow, it is a door standing wide open, and Isaiah is being shoved toward it by forces he still cannot fully name. The intersection of medical tragedy and legal peril begins to draw the rest of Port Charles into the fray. Elizabeth Baldwin, arriving for her shift, finds the atmosphere in the nurses' station somber and hushed. The news of Portia's miscarriage has spread like a contagion through the hospital, stripping away the professional veneer of the staff who looked up to her. Elizabeth, who has navigated her own share of loss within these walls, feels a profound sense of injustice. She knows that Portia's distraction was born of her devotion to Isaiah, and she begins to wonder if there is something the medical staff missed, not in Portia's care, but in the suspicious circumstances that led to Isaiah's arrest. She starts to look back through the records of the weeks leading up to the crisis, searching for any anomaly in the hospital's internal data that might suggest Isaiah was being targeted from within the very institution they serve. Her investigation is quiet, a subterranean effort to find the truth before the hammer falls on the Robinson family for good. In the OB/GYN wing, the physical recovery for Portia is complicated by a sudden, spiking fever that sends the medical team into a fresh state of alarm. The trauma of the miscarriage has led to an infection, a secondary medical emergency that threatens to turn a tragic loss into a fatal one. Curtis is forced to step out of the room as doctors and nurses swarm his wife's bedside, the irony of the situation reaching a cruel peak. He stands in the hallway, the same hallway where he has waited for news of others, and feels a terrifying sense of helplessness. He is a man of action, a man who solves problems with his hands and his heart, but he cannot fight an infection, and he cannot fight the ghost of a child. He leans his head against the cool glass of the window, looking out over the city of Port Charles, wondering if the darkness that has descended on his family is a temporary eclipse or the beginning of a permanent winter. As Portia fights for her life in a diluted haze of fever, Isaiah's preliminary hearing begins. He is led into the courtroom in shackles, the heavy clink of the chains echoing against the marble floors. The room is filled with spectators and press, drawn by the scandal of a prominent doctor facing serious criminal charges. Jordan Ashford sits in the back row, her heart heavy as she watches the man she has come to respect be treated like a common felon. The prosecution presents their opening statements with a theatrical flair, painting Isaiah as a brilliant but cold-blooded opportunist who used his medical knowledge to facilitate a sophisticated insurance fraud scheme. Every time Isaiah looks toward the gallery, hoping to see his sister's supportive face, he is reminded that she is across town, fighting her own battle for survival. The isolation he feels is absolute, a crushing weight that makes the air in the courtroom feel thin and toxic. The narrative takes a sharp turn when a surprise witness is called to the stand, a former administrative assistant from General Hospital who claims to have seen Isaiah altering digital records. The testimony is a lie, a carefully coached performance, but to the judge and the jury, it is the final piece of a damning puzzle. Isaiah's defense tries to cross-examine, to poke holes in the woman's story, but she is well rehearsed, her eyes brimming with fake tears as she describes her fear of Dr. Robinson. In that moment, the trap closes. The judge denies bail, citing Isaiah as a flight risk with international connections, and orders him to be remanded to Pentonville to await trial. The sound of the gavel is like a gunshot, signaling the end of Isaiah's life as he knew it. He is led out of the courtroom not toward a home or a hospital, but toward a transport van that will take him to one of the most dangerous prisons in the state. The news of Isaiah's remand reaches Portia just as her fever begins to break. She is weak, her voice a mere whisper, but the fire in her eyes returns the moment she hears that her brother is being sent to prison. She demands to be discharged, her medical instincts overruled by her maternal and sisterly protectiveness. Curtis tries to reason with her, telling her that she is in no condition to leave, but Portia is immovable. She has lost her child, and she refuses to lose her brother too. With Curtis's reluctant help, she manages to sit up, her body protesting every movement, but her mind is already racing. She realizes that if Isaiah was framed, the evidence must be within the hospital's own servers, hidden behind the very firewalls she helped maintain. Her grief is channeled into a cold, clinical fury, a drive to uncover the conspiracy that has cost her so much in so little time. Back at the precinct, Jordan Ashford finds herself unable to let the case go. The testimony of the administrative assistant felt too polished, too convenient. She begins her own off-the-books investigation, retracing the steps of the woman who testified against Isaiah. What she finds is a trail of breadcrumbs leading back to a shell company with ties to a familiar name in the Port Charles underworld, a name that suggests Isaiah was never the target, but merely much larger game to gain control over the hospital's board of directors. The realization that Portia and Isaiah were victims of a corporate coup disguised as a criminal investigation adds a new layer of horror to the situation. Jordan knows she has to move fast. Pentonville is no place for a man like Isaiah, and the longer he is there, the more likely he is to become a casualty of the system. The final scenes of this chapter unfold in the grim corridors of Pentonville, where Isaiah is processed into the general population. The transition from the pristine white halls of a hospital to the gray, iron-barred reality of prison is a psychological shock that threatens to break him. He is surrounded by men he once might have treated as patients, but here, he is just another number, a target for those who despise the elite. As the cell door slams shut, locking him into a 5x9 space, the weight of his situation becomes a physical pressure on his chest. He thinks of Portia, hoping she is recovering, unaware that she is currently dragging herself out of a hospital bed to fight for him. The two siblings, separated by miles and by the different types of trauma they have endured, are now both fueled by a desperate need for justice. The script ends on a note of chilling uncertainty as Portia, supported by Curtis, walks out of General Hospital against medical advice. She is pale, her steps are unsteady, and her heart is broken, but she is a woman with a mission. The loss of her baby has stripped away her fear, leaving behind a raw, unyielding determination to burn down the lies that have destroyed her family. As they drive away from the hospital, the camera lingers on the sign of the institution, once a beacon of healing, now a crime scene of a different sort. The battle for Isaiah's freedom and Portia's soul has only just begun, and the shadows of Port Charles are growing longer, hiding the secrets that will either save them or lead to their ultimate destruction. The medical emergency has passed, but the true crisis is just beginning to unfold in the heart of the city. The third chapter of this unfolding tragedy begins in the cold, unforgiving atmosphere of the Pentonville Processing Center, where the transition from a man of science to a man of the state is finalized with the rhythmic thud of a heavy iron door. Isaiah Robinson sits on the edge of a thin, communal cot, the air around him thick with the smell of floor wax and despair. He can still feel the phantom weight of his stethoscope around his neck, a sharp contrast to the rough fabric of the orange jumpsuit that now defines his identity. Every sound in the cell block, the shouting of guards, the distant clanging of metal, the low murmur of inmates, serves as a reminder of how far he has fallen. His mind is a chaotic loop of Portia's ashen face and the judge's indifferent gavel. He knows that in a place like this, a doctor is often viewed with either suspicion or predatory interest, and he realizes with a sinking heart that he must learn to navigate a world without rules while his sister fights to survive the physical and emotional wreckage he feels responsible for causing. In the quiet of their home, Portia Robinson moves like a ghost through the rooms that were supposed to be filled with the sounds of a growing family. The physical pain from the infection has subsided into a dull, nagging ache, but it is the emptiness of the house that truly haunts her. Every corner holds a reminder of the life that was snatched away, a box of maternity clothes hidden in the back of the closet, a book on infant care resting on the nightstand, the silence of a nursery that will never be used. Curtis watches her with a mixture of profound love and paralyzing fear, sensing that the woman he married is being replaced by someone forged in the fires of grief. Portia does not cry anymore, her tears have dried into a brittle resolve. She spends her hours hunched over a laptop, her medical expertise now focused on the digital forensics of the hospital's patient management system. She is looking for the glitch that the prosecution used to bury Isaiah, convinced that the person who framed her brother is someone she might have greeted in the cafeteria or stood beside in the operating room. The tension within the hospital reaches a breaking point when Portia returns to her office, not as a patient, but as the chief of medicine demanding answers. Her colleagues offer platitudes and lowered eyes, but Portia bypasses the sympathy, heading straight for the IT department. She discovers that the administrative assistant who testified against Isaiah was hired under a cloud of redirected references, a ghost in the machine whose employment history was as fabricated as her testimony. As Portia digs deeper, she realizes the breach goes beyond a simple frame-up. Someone has been using the hospital's procurement system to funnel high-end pharmaceuticals into the black market, and Isaiah was chosen as the scapegoat because his impeccable record made him the perfect shield. The betrayal is personal. It suggests that the medical emergency she suffered, the stress that likely triggered her miscarriage, was an orchestrated byproduct of a corporate heist.